Hello, I'm Mike Vinsel. Today I'm going to continue reading my book, Travels with Nobody, and today we're doing chapter 15, Olympia. All right, and that's page 224 in the book, and today is September 1st. Yesterday I read chapter 16. I was mistaken. I made a mistake. Skipped chapter 15. So here we go. Chapter 15, Olympia. We had taken the coast route until we saw signs for Portland. We got onto Interstate 5 in Portland and took that the rest of the way to Olympia. Irritated drivers passed us along the way, but we made it. I remember seeing the buildings of the Olympia Brewery just before the exit for Olympia. Tours daily, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. "Who takes a brewery tour at 8 in the morning?" Matthew commented. We got off the highway and called Terry from a payphone. She gave us directions to her house. Terry and her two daughters, Cynthia, 5 years old, and Jeannie, 3, were waiting in the driveway to greet us when we pulled up. The kids had been babies the last time I'd seen them. Her husband, Ken Grassy, would arrive home soon from work. We went inside and played with the kids and talked. When Ken arrived, we ate dinner and talked some more. We talked about my plans for finding a place to live. I had told them about Kevin Paulson and Pat Wrigley. They had said it would be okay for them to stay for a couple of weeks or so, as long as we could fit all of our stuff in one room. Matthew and Philip caught flights home the next day. I called Kevin Paulson at his parents' house in Wisconsin. I told him my sister's number and that we could all stay at her house until we got a place of our own. It was all going to work out. Kevin and Pat were heading out in the morning. They'd be taking I-90 the whole way. They'd be in Olympia in 3 days, Kevin said. Sure enough, they arrived 3 days later. Terry and Ken were good sports about us being there. They hadn't expected Pat to have a kitten with her, but she did. It was named Trout. I forget how many days it took us to find a place to live, but it wasn't too long. We found a duplex house in Lacey, the town just to the east of Olympia. It had tall Douglas fir trees out front. The trees had straight, branchless trunks all the way up to their crowns, indicating to me that they had grown up in thick forest. They must have been left by the developers for aesthetics when the land had been cleared for the development. But they seemed incongruent with the otherwise generic subdivision landscaping, with its azaleas and rhododendrons set in islands of rust-colored bark mulch, islands in a lawn of green grass. But it was our place. We had a place of our own. We moved in. It was a celebratory time. We set up our household. No furniture, everything in boxes. With the three of us together, we could pay the rent and the security deposit. I still had several $100s left after all the expenses. My next task would be to find a job. Kevin and Pat would be okay once their student loan arrangements had been dispersed, which would be a matter of a few days. Over the next few days, I would take the bus into Olympia to a coffee shop called the Spar and scan the want ads in the Olympian for a job. There were openings at restaurants, the Spar hiring all positions. Indeed, a handwritten sign on the wall said the same thing. I had washed dishes at restaurants when I was in high school. I had been the slowest of them all. I knew that being a waiter required a type of confident personality which I knew I didn't have. I didn't go for those jobs. There was one listing that caught my eye, a night job, a cleaning crew. The work hours were from midnight to 10 o'clock in the next morning. I wondered what that would be like. It was minimum wage, $3.75 an hour. I called the number. A groggy-voiced man asked me where I lived. I told him I told him the address, and he said he'd be able to pick me up at my house. I wouldn't need to drive. I thought to myself. He said that if I can swing a mop and lift 50 pounds, I'd do fine. I decided to give it a try. I would start the next night. I told him that I wanted to get used to staying up all night, which, upon completion of the last word of the sentence, I regretted saying. Why did I say silly things like that? But nothing came of it. I had a job. I let the feeling sink in. I had a job. I took the bus back to the house and told Kevin and Pat. They congratulated me, but Pat wondered if working the night shift was going to work out for me. I figured I'd get used to it. I stayed up with them drinking beer until they went to bed. I stayed up until 2 in the morning. The next day I slept as late as I could. That night I was ready for work. I waited outside for the crew to arrive. Just before midnight, a car pulled into our subdivision. It was a hearse. A hearse? It drove up to our building and stopped. The guy rolled down the window and asked if I was Stephen Stroh. I was, I told him. He gestured for me to get in. He told me that he had to pick up two other guys, and then we would head out to the first job of the night. The boss, I forget his name, and the two other guys were friendly enough, but there was something about them, something that made me feel uncomfortable. Perhaps it was that they were 3 men in their 20s or 30s who drove around in a hearse at night, going from closed restaurant to closed restaurant, cleaning the kitchens at night. It was a purely nocturnal life. We arrived at the first restaurant. It was a chain family restaurant, like a Big Boy or one of those that close at 10 or 11. My new boss had the back door key. We got all the buckets, mops, and other cleaning equipment out of the back of the hearse. The boss let us in and showed me the routine. He said I'd get used to it after a few times, but to bear with him as he explained everything. We took out the rubber lattice mats that allow the chefs to avoid slipping on the otherwise wet floor. I had to take those mats out back to where the hose was and rinse them off as well as I could. They were heavy and slimy, slimy with spilled friolator grease or whatever else it might be. Without the mats, the floor was dangerously slippery. I would have to mop that as well, then return the cleaned mats to the mopped floor. After that, he'd let me know what to do. The boss helped himself to a rum and coke from the bar. He said I was welcome to fix a drink too if I wanted. As long as I could get the work done on time, he didn't care. I didn't fix myself any drinks from the bar. The other guys had other jobs to do, cleaning the toilets, the vents over the grill and stoves, mopping the floor of the dining room where the customers would eat. The tables were not our responsibility. The three of us workers worked while the boss took his drink to a booth and lay down, feet into the aisle. He eventually fell asleep there. Then, when we had completed our assigned tasks, we woke him up, and he drove us to the next job. Along the way, one of the guys in the back seat wrapped aluminum foil around a pen to make a makeshift pipe, slipping it off the pen and bending it to form a little bowl. I figured they were going to smoke weed. But then, when they lit up, I could tell that it wasn't weed. It smelled like burning plastic. It brought back to me an olfactory déjà vu, a memory of a plastic model I had built of the USS Arizona. I had been very careful in building it, painting it with realistic weathering. My friend Rob O'Leary and I had brought the model to a vernal pool in the woods near our school bus stop. We wedged firecrackers behind the gun turrets, inside the funnel, inside the superstructure, and the ship's bridge. We lit the plastic on fire in several spots and sent the ship toward the center of the pool with a gentle push. We watched as wisps of black smoke rose from the growing flames. When the flames reached the firecracker fuses, The explosions ripped away parts of the ship. It seemed very realistic to us. The smoke of burning plastic, that is what their drugs smelled like. But its smoke was white. They offered me a hit. I asked what it was. They said it was speed. I had never had speed before. I declined. I wouldn't know what to expect. I wanted to be able to do my job. Suit yourself, the guy holding the pipe said. We arrived at the next restaurant. The routine was the same. I would wash the kitchen mats, mop the floor, put the mats back, and then help the other guys with whatever they were doing. When we were done with that restaurant, we went to the next, and to the next after that, and the next after that. I had not anticipated how wet I would get, and thus how cold. Olympia was not as cold as New Hampshire, but it was plenty cold if you were wet. The sun came up, and we had only 3 more restaurants to clean. We'd be done by 10 o'clock, just on time. We finished the work for that day, and the boss dropped us off in the reverse order of how he had picked us up. He pulled up to my house and told me that he'd pick me up again at midnight. I went inside to take a shower and go to bed. I was exhausted and filthy, the kind of filthy that would fill the house with that foul smell of dumpsters behind restaurants. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Pat Wrigley said, smiling. I told her I would take my clothes to the laundry right after I took a shower. I put them in a big plastic trash bag to contain the filth as much as possible until then. In the shower, I realized that Pat had been right. This job was not going to last for me. After showering, I went to the laundry room for our section and put the clothes in. When I got back, Pat and Kevin were sitting at the kitchen table. So how'd it go? Kevin asked. I haven't had too many jobs in my life, but I bet that when I'm an old man, I will look back on this as the worst job I ever had, I said. I see, Pat said. It was hell, I said. I decided that I should call the boss before he goes to sleep and tell him that the job is not for me. That's what I did. He just said, okay, and hung up. I guess that's all I would expect. I didn't expect to be paid for the one night I had worked. I wasn't going to pursue the issue. But the next morning, at a little after 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. There he was. What did he want? This is your pay from the night before last, he said. He handed me an envelope. It was $40. That was more than I had expected. You did all right for a first-timer. I know it isn't for everybody. Anyway, if you're ever desperate, give me a call, he said. So that was that. I was $40 richer. Kevin and Pat liked to make homemade spring rolls. In those days, we called them egg rolls, even though they didn't contain eggs. We all got in zippy and went grocery shopping. We bought the groceries to stock a household: flour, eggs, pancake mix, bread, hamburger meat, hot dogs, cheese, some other things. And we bought egg roll ingredients, whatever they were, I don't remember, and wrappers. Kevin and I each bought 40-ounce bottles of Rainier ale. We would make egg rolls and drink beer to celebrate. I drove to the Spar in the morning to resume my job search. Kevin and Pat would be busy with arrangements for their enrollment at Evergreen. I found a listing for Seufert and Son Nurseries in Tumwater, just south of Olympia. It paid $4 an hour. Pretty good pay, I thought. There was a map of Thurston County tacked to the wall. The nursery was on Capitol Boulevard. With my finger, I followed the route on the map. I would be able to find it. I called to ask for an interview. Fred Seufert, Jr. answered. I told him I could drive to the place immediately, that I was in downtown Olympia. He said he'd be in his office. I drove down Capitol Boulevard into Tumwater, crossing the Deschutes River. It wasn't the famous Deschutes River in Oregon, famous for fly fishing. Some years before, I had read a book called Fishing the Oregon Country by Francis H. Ames. He wrote glowingly of the Deschutes, the one in Oregon. I remember the book because in it he made the remarkable and ridiculous argument that an interest in fishing, he must have meant fly fishing, indicated a wholesomeness of character, that a fisherman would never engage in delinquency or criminal activity. The point caught my eye, as I had grown up fly fishing with Matthew and his friends, who, as soon as I was old enough, introduced me to the sublime meditative pleasure of fly fishing while stoned. But I suppose that was not really criminal activity, even though it was illegal. I remember recalling just that thought as I crossed the river on my way to Seufert Nurseries. Shortly after the Deschutes was the Olympia Brewery. A mile or so after that, I arrived at the nursery. Before I had arrived, I was not exactly sure what the word nursery in this case meant. Did they raise poultry or flowers? But then I could see by the sign it was a tree farm. On the edge of the sign there was, unmistakably, a bullet hole. I pulled into the parking lot, parked, went up and knocked on the office door. "Come in," a voice said. I went in. Fred Seufert, Jr. sat in his swiveling chair at his desk. The arrangement of the office was similar to that of Rockmount Orchards, where I had worked in New Hampshire. Here I was, almost a year to the day since my interview at Rockmount. For all I knew, it might have been precisely 1 year. That had been early January, too. Mr. Seufert indicated for me to sit down. There was a chair facing the desk. He was a big man, imposing, well over 6 feet, sturdy build, short, uncombed, sand-colored hair, a mustache and stubble beard. He appeared to be in his 40s. "You looking for work? What brings you here?" he asked. The way he said it sounded as if he thought that to seek work here was a crazy idea. I told him that I'd just moved to Olympia from New Hampshire, that I used to work at an apple orchard there. "So you can drive a tractor?" he asked. I told him I could. "Well, that's a plus. What brings you to the West Coast from cozy little New Hampshire?" he asked. "A couple of my friends from back east are going to Evergreen State College. I'm not going to college, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to come out here. And my sister lives in Olympia," I told him. "What's her name?" "Terry Grassy," I said. "Never heard of her. Anyway, so you come out here with a couple of greeners? That's not a plus," he said. Pat and Kevin had told me about Evergreen. That is, they said it was an alternative school, what others might call a hippie school. I guessed that Fred Seufert, Jr. didn't like hippies. Was I a hippie? I didn't consider myself to be one. I assured Mr. Seufert that I was not a hippie, if that was what he was worried about. "That's fine, you're hired," he said. He got the forms out for me to sign, just like at Rockmount Orchards. He explained the work hours and conditions, and that I could begin the following Monday morning at 7, just like at Rockmount. So I had a job. Okay, and here's the picture of the parking lot in the outskirts of Seufert Nurseries, Tumwater, Washington. You can see the sign with the bullet hole in there. Okay. Back at the house, I told Kevin and Pat about the interview. I told them that it looked like a bleak place. This one I thought would also not last long, I told them, but I would go and see how it worked out. Monday arrived. I got up before dawn, made lunch, ate breakfast, filled my thermos, and drove to work as a leaden glow began to reveal an overcast sky. It was the first time I had gotten up before dawn since I had left the orchard in November. Just a second, I'm going to get a drink here. iced coffee here. Okay. I arrived 10 minutes before 7. The gate was padlocked. Several people waited outside the gate, standing stiffly in their coats, inhaling through cigarettes, hands in pockets to conserve warmth, and perhaps more a posture to steel themselves against the prospect of the day's work that lay ahead. One man told me in exhaled smoke that Junior, they called him Junior, would open the gate at 7 sharp. A bus arrived, a converted school bus, painted navy blue with wire mesh welded over the windows. Thurston County Corrections Facility stenciled on its side. The bus stopped. The door opened and 7 or 8 men got out. I looked at the man who'd talked to me. "Work release," he said. The bus left, and the prisoners joined us. Together there were about 20 people, men and women, some my age, some old. All the prisoners were men. Junior emerged from his office, walked slowly down the few steps to the pavement. He walked deliberately slowly, it seemed to me, pulled out his keys on their retractable chain, unlocked the padlock, and slid the gate open. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked just as slowly back toward his office. What a strange guy, I thought. I followed the man who had talked to me. He seemed to know how everything worked. When we got into the sorting room, he started talking. He introduced himself as floor boss Dave Fletcher. He was about 6 feet tall, stocky, with a brown beard and mustache. He wore a dark brown oilskin coat and a silver aluminum hard hat with a round brim similar to a World War I doughboy helmet. For the next couple months, we're going to be sorting. You just pick a station alongside one of the conveyor belts. Don't matter which one, he said. There were 2 parallel conveyor belts, each about 30 feet long. The building was an I-beam framing with corrugated sheet metal siding and roofing. The floor, concrete, burnished black with years of soil ground into it by work boots. The lighting was a series of fluorescent fixtures set high over the conveyor belts, high enough that their light was dissipated and had to be supplemented by keeping the loading dock doors open. The room felt cold and dark, the air damp, hazy with humidity, infused with the aromas of Christmas trees and soil. It began to rain outside. He held a sample tree and explained the work. Today we're sorting Douglas fir. The customer is Weyerhaeuser. The specs are 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch diameter stems at 4 inches above the base, no shorter than 18 inches above the roots, no longer than 24 inches, roots included, he said, indicating these specs on the sample tree. Each station had a wooden ruler on which these measurements were marked. You'll get used to it. Fact is, most of them are up to spec. You just have to pick the good ones up until you get 10, and then bundle them with a twist tie. Put them in your tub, all facing the same way. Never mind the oddballs. Those go into the oddball bin at the end. When you get 10 bundles of 10, wrap those together with the red tape, so we'll know it's 100 trees. That's it. When your tub is full, Ernie or me will take it away. The other line had already started. When he was done talking to me, he hit the switch for our conveyor belt, and work began. Ernie Baldwin dumped full tubs of young trees onto the belt, and the people before me on the line spread them out so they would be easier to sort. I did as the others did, except that I was left-handed. I picked the trees with my left hand and put them in my right hand until I counted 10 trees. I tied them with a twist tie and put that aside until I had 10 bundles, tied them with the red tape, and put them in my tub. It was easy enough work. The guy opposite me on the conveyor belt asked where I was from. I told him. He said his name was Jeff Paquette. He asked if I liked Frank Zappa. I told him I did. He said he was a local from Tumwater and had been working for about a year at the nursery. Okay, now here's the picture of what work was like at the nursery there. So we're sorting trees on the conveyor belt. And this guy here in the red and black plaid thing, that's Stephen Stroh. Okay, that's right. He said that after a few hours, it gets to be pretty numbing looking at the conveyor belt. You get kind of hypnotized so that when it stops, sometimes people fall over. But you'll get used to it, he said. I told him of my drive across the country, then coming up to Washington with two of my brothers. He told me that his wife was pregnant and staying at her mother's place in Lacey. He said that at lunchtime he and a couple of the guys were going to his place. I was welcome if I wanted to join them. I told him that I would. Jeff was right about the conveyor belt hypnosis. After about an hour or so, it became difficult to keep my eyes open, sort of like road hypnosis when you're driving. Just a second here. Yeah, you got to keep talking or you'll fall asleep, he said, stirring me back to alertness. No doubt, I said. Just like he said, when the belt stopped at 9:30 break, I nearly fell forward. My eyes had gotten so used to the movement. My hands were also numb from the cold and being constantly wet from the soil that clung to the roots. By the end of the day, this soil would find its way into every crevice of my clothing, rubbed into the very fabric itself on my chest and belly. At lunchtime, we all went into the locker room, at the center of which was a large circular sink operated by a foot pedal where many people could wash their hands at the same time. We washed up as well as we could, grabbed our lunches, and four of us went out to Jeff's car. He had an old Ford station wagon. His house was only a mile or so from the nursery. We all went inside and sat in his living room and began to eat. The other people were Tom Lacasse, and Joellen Barrett. You get high? Tom Lacasse asked. I didn't want to smoke weed, especially on my first day of work, but I also wanted to have allies. I decided I would join them. They passed around a joint. I got a little high, but it was no problem. We finished eating and went back to work. As much as I had not wanted to get high, I had to admit to myself that it provided a little anesthesia for this mind-numbing work. After a few days, I did get used to the work. Over the next few days, I met some of the prisoners. Brad Keller was in his 50s and had been in prison 10 years for an armed robbery he had committed in the early 1970s. Oh yes, I did it all right, he said to us. He told us that he was going to be released the following year, so they gave him work release to get him used to the outside world. One time, Jeff Paquette was talking about weed. Jeff and his friends grew it and knew a lot about the different strains. Brad Keller said that before he was in jail, he used to smoke weed. That Colombian, man, that's good stuff, he'd said. Dude, you've been locked up for a long time. The good shit's Ghani. That is, Afghani. Colombian, that's ancient history, Jeff said. I worried for Brad Keller. If he were to be caught stoned or test positive on a drug test, it would be a disaster. I don't know how common drug testing was back then, but it was being promoted in television ads, part of President Reagan's war on drugs. But one time, Brad joined us for lunch at Jeff's house. They all got high. By that time, I had become familiar enough to be able to decline smoking, but Brad Keller smoked, and afterward agreed with Tom that homegrown Ghani was indeed better than the old Colombian. I developed a routine where I would get home from work, take my clothes off in the entranceway, put the dirty clothes in a trash bag, and take a shower. I'd put on clean clothes and then take the dirty clothes to the laundry. In our complex, the laundry room had several heavy-duty machines. Pat and Kevin had been married just the previous fall, but they were also full-time college students, living on student loans and Pell Grants. We all got along well enough. We all had weekends free and would go for drives to the mountains, both to the Cascades and the Olympic Peninsula. Sometimes we would take the ferry to Vashon Island. They knew a guy who lived there in his mother's basement. Pat and Kevin knew him from LRY conferences. He grew weed indoors with metal halide lights. I never learned his real name. In making the plans to visit the first time, Kevin, over the phone, had agreed that I would not learn the guy's real name. To me, he would just be David. No last name. Those were the conditions. When we arrived, his mother let us in, and David came upstairs to introduce us. He took us downstairs and showed us his setup. He, too, knew a lot about the different breeds of weed and their characteristics. Kevin and Pat would always buy some. They would smoke up, and we would all join the guy's mother in her living room. She would serve coffee, and we would all engage in pleasant conversation. David's mother had been an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War. I had watched the PBS series on that war that had been broadcast in episodes over several months the previous year. I said that I thought it had been a very good series. She contended that it was good in as far as it would give the viewer at least the basics of what happened. She lamented that young people knew nothing about the war, that it was based on lies, and, "Oh, that McNamara, don't get me started on him," she said. I wanted to keep the conversation pleasant, but my knowledge of the war was insufficient to keep up on that subject. I knew that I, and Kevin and Pat too, were exactly the kind of young people that David's mother had been lamenting. But I knew that it was inevitable that people who were only children at the time would not be as personally involved or knowledgeable about the Vietnam War as she was. I was just a kid back then. What concerns me now is El Salvador, Nicaragua, and now Grenada? Grenada, what's that all about? And Lebanon. Did I miss any? I said. I brought up the deployment of the USS New Jersey to the coast of Lebanon. What more obvious a PR move could they do? I mentioned the scene in Dr. Strangelove of the shadow on the ground being that of a B-17, not a B-52. She had seen the movie and appreciated the observation. She said she had not noticed about the shadow. The conversation ended pleasantly, and Pat, Kevin, and I left, riding in Kevin's Volvo Zippy. We took the ferry back to Seattle, and then drove back to Olympia. Okay, that's the end of chapter 15. Okay, and I'll see you next time.